Hello, hello, and welcome. Sorry, on our end, we're just learning how to use all this technology. And so we have here today David Hughes, and David is such an amazing guy. He's the teacher of our coordinate remote viewing course that's coming in March. The dates are March
25th, 29th.
25th to the 29th of 2020. And you can come in here. Alyssa's here. She's going to be helping me with the technology today. And so a little bit about David. He is the Chief Technology Officer of the Recording Industry Association of America. So he's a big wig. He's definitely got lots of technical training, and that's what makes him so good at teaching and, of course, talking about remote viewing. He has taken every single level with David Morehouse, and in fact has helped taught most of the courses. He's taught in San Diego, San Francisco, Toronto, the Virgin Islands, you name it. He's also went traveling with Becca as well to Peru and Dr. David Morehouse. And they did a lot of experiences there. If you have questions about that, you can, of course, ask David during the call. Alyssa's going to be in charge of most of the question and such. We had a few questions that were submitted online beforehand. And so those questions will be answered as well. And if you have any other questions, you can always just put it in the chat on the side here, and hopefully we can get you in. If you want to, of course, speak face-to-face, then let us know, because we can get that all sorted out as well. All right, so better ado, here's David Hughes. There we go. Is it working? It still says it's me.
Nope. Oh, hold on. Dave, oh, no, it's our internet.
Okay, David, go ahead.
David?
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody can hear me. It sounds like there's a little echoing back and forth, but we'll start. So, yeah, so as Britta said, my name is David Hughes. I am, in fact, a technology guy. I started my career at Sony in Tokyo about 25 years ago, and spent most of my career at Sony Music, where I was the head of digital technology. And I'm now the chief technologist for the Recording Industry Association. So we are the trade organization for all the record companies. Among other things, we give out gold and platinum records. But in my wheelhouse, we set technology standards, going back to the very first standard for the 33 1/3 LP record was set by the RAAA. And we set technical standards that are used and work on new formats. But the value that brings to remote viewing for me is that I spent much of my career explaining technology to people who are not technologists, people in sales, executives, lawyers who have to figure out how to do the business deals. And so I think I'm really pretty good at translating complex technical ideas and concepts and issues into understandable. I'll touch on very briefly was that he was in the US military, and through a series of events, he ended up being recruited for a unit based in Fort Meade, Maryland, only about 20 minutes from where I live now here in Washington, DC. And was trained as a psychic spy, because that's really what the remote viewers were. And he did that for 3 years. And then a few years later, when he got out of the Army, he wrote a book called Psychic Warrior about his experiences, particularly his experiences learning and doing remote viewing. And then he started teaching in the late 90s. First, he started teaching pro bono, teaching law enforcement mostly, remote viewing. And eventually, by the late 90s, based on the popularity of his book and other people had heard about it, general public started asking him, "Can't you please teach?" So he was actually making TV shows and videos was the business that he was in at that point, and working with Discovery Channel and stuff like that. And he said, you know what, maybe I'm going to pivot my business and start teaching full time. And that's what he did. And when I had first met him was around the time that he had started teaching full time. And he was traveling around the world, San Diego, San Francisco, Oslo. He had a few cities that he focused on. He was just traveling around teaching remote viewing. And so I started taking all his classes. And when I had finished taking the classes, by that time I had become good friends with him. And just 1 second. Hopefully I won't keep getting texts throughout this. They're coming through on my computer. Anyway, I started teaching with him, helping him teach. And later on, we started working on other projects together, which I could talk about, other applications of remote viewing, as well as helping him a little bit with the books that he was writing and the course material that he was making, both for the classes like the one that we're going to teach in March, as well as the books that he wrote about remote viewing. So that's my background. And but mostly what I want to do is answer your questions about, you know, what your questions are. I can try to give you an idea about what remote viewing is. But, if people have some, if you have general questions, let's start with. If there's any general questions, let's start with those. You know, sort of what is remote viewing, stuff like that, and we'll go from there.
All right, so we have, these are the ones that we were submitted online. So let's start with that. What's the best place to get started with remote viewing? That was one of the big questions we were asked.
The history of the remote viewing protocol, which is really what it is, it's like any other, it was developed by the military, for the military, really. So the same way that they have a protocol to teach people to do anything, operate a radio, fly a helicopter, they come up with manuals and protocols to teach people how to remote view. And these were really based on a series of sort of classroom setting course work. You can learn to remote view by using home study courses and other things, but the best way to learn to remote view is in a classroom with a group of remote viewers. And there are several reasons why that's the best way. One reason is that the results of any one viewer are never going to be 100%. But if you have a group of people, let's say we have 20 or 40 people in a classroom, and we are learning how to remote view, we're going to start with calibration targets. What that means is we are going to after everybody learns to get in a meditative state and learn a few tricks about how remote viewing works, I'll come back to that in a minute. You're going to try to have the people describe in words or pictures a specific target. And what we start with are calibration targets. And that means that the target is something that we know a lot about. Now, we haven't told any of the viewers what it is. It's a blind target, but the person who's assigning it, the instructor, knows what the target is. So that way, when we get feedback and people describe whatever experiences, tastes, or smells, or images, or feelings that they have about the target, if they have sketches of the target or descriptions or associations, it felt like I was in a church, anything like that, then if we use a calibration target, we can say, yes, that is correct. It was not a church. In fact, it was a Jewish synagogue, but I understand why you said you felt like you were in a church, because that makes sense. And or people would be describing the pews or the singing or the chanting or whatever it is. And we would know, oh yeah. Or maybe another target would be the Eiffel Tower. And people would have sketches of the general shape of the Eiffel Tower. And we could say, now, there's 40 people in the class. Not everybody's going to have a sketch of the Eiffel Tower. But if 3 or 5 or 7 of those people, or 10 of them, have a sketch that looks like the Eiffel Tower, then we can be pretty sure that remote viewing works. And while some people might have a sketch of the Eiffel Tower, another person might be describing the feeling of being very high up and having the wind blow through their hair, if they're lucky enough to have hair. And that kind of thing. So we use calibration target and a large group, then we can see the overall, the aggregate feedback from the group. And then we can, among other things, we can see that, yes, well, I only got a couple of things right. If we put our aggregate data together that we got from these 40 or 30 or 25 remote viewers, then can be very confident that we were there, that we hit the target as a group. And of course, some individuals will be confident that they hit the target if they have a sketch or a very specific description of the target. I heard people speaking French. That was so weird. That would be the kind of thing that you might get if you were doing the Eiffel Tower. Or in fact, as the Eiffel Tower, you could hear any language in the world probably, but you get the idea. So that's why being in a group. The other thing is that as the group gets into the zone, there's a little bit of a resonance with the other people. And the same way that if you go to a scary movie and the people around you are scared, you will feel more scared. Well, if you're sitting in a classroom of people and they're all starting to get this remote viewing thing and they're getting in the right mindset and the right feeling, then everybody amplifies each other. And that's a really nice thing to see. And so that's why I think the best way to learn is in a classroom, not too big, but I'd say 15 to 20 people up to maybe 50 people is ideal. Now, Dave's taught classes with as many as 300 people. It's a different experience. And if you have a lot of assistant instructors coaching the people, that can work very well too. But I know that's a long answer, but that's the best way in a class, very much like the environment that that Britta and Becca have at Core Potentials. It's a perfect environment for learning remote viewing. The other thing is that you need time. This is not something you can do in an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. There are some exceptions, especially when you're teaching very young people. Like when I taught my daughter when she was 10, I actually probably instructed her, for a total of maybe 1 hour before she did her first target, and she managed to do quite well. My son as well, when he was 10 or 11 years old, again, maybe an hour of sort of explaining and practicing. He did his first target and he had an excellent target. But for grown-ups, for adults, really you want to do it in a classroom. Sorry for the long answer, but hopefully that gives you some idea.
That's awesome. Thanks, David. So the next question, that actually answered very well the next question. How can I be sure of the results in case there is no verifiable information? But I guess maybe, I'm guessing the person who asked this question is trying to do some type of remote viewing at home and is seeing if you don't have that group and knowing what your target is, how do you know if you're doing it right or not? What are some of the clues, I guess?
Sure. So when you start remote viewing, it's quite important that you use calibration targets, practice targets, where you can get feedback. And there's a number of ways you can do this. There are websites. You have to be careful. Don't just go randomly on the internet. davidmorehouse.com, on the website, there are some targets I think that are there. There are remote viewers group out of Hawaii that posts some targets. And then the way that you have to anonymize the target, basically, is what you need to do. And the way to do that, to make it a blind target, is to use some kind of number is really the best. Originally, they started by using longitude and latitude, although they realized that subconsciously some of the viewers might be able to start guessing the target based on the longitude and latitude. So they randomized the numbers, and they ended up using 2 4-digit numbers And just 1 minute. I keep getting some things popping up on my screen. Give me a minute, folks.
Okay, well, while you're working on that, I
I'm
can talk about
sorry.
the next
Yeah,
question.
I'm just gonna ignore it. And
Because there's a
here,
second part to
hold on
that
1 second.
question. Yeah, there's a second part to that question as well. And I want to see if that clarifies what it is that we were trying to do.
Okay.
It says, if I can't verify the target, in which psychic areas can remote viewing help? Like if by learning the protocol remote viewing, how can it help in other psychic areas? I think that's more of the
Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to segue from one to the other. So when you start by training using calibration targets, then you build up a certain confidence. The first time a remote viewer has a really good session, there's a change in your mindset. Anybody intelligent is going to be somewhat skeptical about remote viewings. Like, how does this work? Modern science, or contemporary science, whatever we want to call it, current science, can't explain how it works. So how do we know it works? Well, once you've had 1 or 2 targets and it's really worked, and you've done a blind target, you've got your notes, you've written down your description, your sketches, and then you get feedback from an instructor, or you open an envelope with the sealed envelope with the information inside, or you go on the website and get the information. Once you've done that a few times, then you start to trust that it works. And once you trust that it works, then when you apply it to something that's not a calibration target, you have more confidence. Now, you have to understand that it's not going to be 100%, but there's 2 benefits that you get. One benefit is that you learn to trust your intuition in all situations. So if you're doing anything from healing work to intuitive work to creative work to problem solving to engineering to whatever, you start to trust your intuition because you realize that it's trustable. You've verified it using these calibration targets. So then when you start to do a target that is not verifiable, the other way in the intelligence community, for example, is what they would do is they'd assign the same non-calibration target to multiple viewers. And when they saw the same results from multiple, let's say I assign it to 6 viewers and 3 of them have similar sketches or similar descriptions. Well, the chances of them, being that the target could be anything in the world, that 3 of them would describe the same thing, statistically, that's very unlikely, 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000, whatever it is. So if three of them are describing it, then you assume that that is valid information, and then you try to verify it some other way. If you're in the intelligence community, you try to have a spy or somebody else verify that what the information you collected. In our world, at that point, you sort of have to assume that it's valid information. If multiple people independently, without talking to each other, came up with the same information, then you have to assume that it's valid. And that is one of the rules that we teach, that a single remote viewer, the use of remote viewing by a single remote viewer for information gathering is a little bit limited, but for intuitive work, the more remote viewing you do, the better your intuition gets, and that just makes you better at whatever you're doing. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. If it doesn't,
that was great. I got the next question. This one's on the chat. I was reading about controlled precognition. Can you help me understand how remote viewing and controlled precognition are related? Does remote viewing use ideograms as well?
Okay, I'm going to do this in 2 ways. I'm going to start by saying, what is controlled intuition or controlled remote viewing in the case of what we mean here by controlled? That's the first thing. And then we'll talk about precognition, because it gets a little bit more complicated. So the first thing is to be controlled, we want to be focused on a specific outcome. And that's hard, but that's what the remote viewing protocol really teaches you to do. It teaches you not only to connect with, this is a term that we might use, connect with a target so that you can start collecting information from that target. That's a place that's distant in space, or it could be a place that is distant in time and space. Now, having said, and you collect that information. And that's what remote viewing is about. And we can talk more about exactly how that works. Precognition is quite complicated because based on my experiences doing this for, well, 20 years now, more than 20 years, I guess, I'm 21st year now. The further you go into the future, the less accurate your remote viewing results are. And the term precognition, I'll take to mean remote viewing the future. If we mean the same thing, if the question meant something different, please clarify. But let's assume that what you mean is remote viewing the future. The further you go in the future, the less accurate it is, generally speaking. This is not the case in the past. If you're doing a remote viewing target in the past or in the present as well, the main factor seems to be how strong the energetic imprint of the target is. Now, I know that's a lot of words, but if you were doing a historic event that a lot of people witnessed, for example, or millions of people have thought about, read about, talked about, I'm always reluctant to give examples because then I can't use them in my next class, but the sinking of the Titanic, for example. The sinking of the Titanic is so firmly embedded in the consciousness, in the collective consciousness of people, that I believe that makes it an easier target to remote view. And the same doesn't work in the future, because it is my belief that the future is not fixed. You can remote view the most likely future, and the closer that event is to the present, and the more fixed that kind of event is, meaning trying to remote view the weather on a certain day in the future would be much harder than the economic environment in the country, which, you know, something that changes slowly and doesn't change hour by hour, day by day. Maybe it's something that's fixed in a trend that takes years or decades to change. You're more likely to get an accurate result in the future than something that's not. I know that's kind of hard, but the upshot of it is, if you're remote viewing, your best chance is remote view the most likely future outcome. And that's not exactly precognition, but that's as close as you're going to get using remote viewing. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, David. I also have in the manual that's given with the course, I wonder if anyone can see that, the graph that shows how time is. Am I in the right spot?
Yes. Yeah, you're holding it up.
Yeah.
So this has to do with Diracs formula, and it basically, if you were oversimplifying it, it would say the further you go in the future is not fixed. So the further you go into the future, remote viewing, the less accurate your results can be expected to be. Now, there are other ways you can use remote viewing in the future. And one of those is to remote view your most positive future. So you could look 5 years or 10 years into your own future, and you could say, I want to see what my future looks like, best case scenario. What would be a great place for me to be in terms of my life, my family life, my relationships, my career, 5 years or 10 years from now? And that is not precognition in the terms of what's going to happen or what's most likely to happen, but by seeing that future, you can make that a concrete future in your mind. And the same way that people like, oh, I'm trying to remember if it's Stephen Covey or some of people like that who've said, if you want something to happen in your future, you have to make it concrete. Don't say 5 years from now, I want to have my own truck. If you're a truck driver, you drive an 18-wheeler. 5 years from now, I want to own my own truck, and that's it. 5 years from now, I want to own this exact kind of truck with this engine and this cab in this color. And I want to be doing this with that truck. And I want to have my own business in 10 years. And my own business, I want to be doing this and that. The more specific you are, the more specific your energy can focus on that future. And that's another way to use remote viewing. It's a little different than the standard training of calibration targets, but it's certainly a very useful application of the tool set of the protocols that you would learn doing remote viewing. Sorry, I'm totally off topic, but kind of connected.
David, I had actually a question because I was reading David Morehouse's Psychic Warrior, and right in the prologue there, he has an experience where he's gone back to talk to someone that had passed, and that kind of opened up his entire view of connection and energy and various different things. And I was hoping you could elaborate on why that worked and how that experience, if you understand what my question is.
I do understand what the question is. And if we were teaching a 3-day class, my answer might be a little more complicated in a class. But since we only have a few minutes, it can work. I think in a nutshell, not to be too metaphysical about it, but if you were remote viewing to connect with a person who had passed and you wanted to get messages from them or something, I suspect that what you would get from that, if you were going to get a message or hear their voice or get a feeling or an image or some instructions about life or recollection on some unresolved issues, that you're more likely to get what the wisdom of the universe thinks you need, rather than perhaps that person actually talking to you from the past. But that's probably the scientist in me saying that there's a wisdom in this universe, and that's part of how remote viewing works. I'm not sure that just learning to remote view gives you the ability to converse freely with people who have passed in that sense. However, I have my own personal experience remote viewing, and in some cases, my mother, who passed in 2002, I heard her voice very clearly, as if she was in the room. I was in a dark, quiet room doing remote viewing, actually with a group of people at that point. But I was remote viewing a target that was personal to me, which is something we do more in the advanced levels. And my mother came to me. I heard her voice very clearly. She delivered a message to me that made 100% sense. And it was like a soundbite. And, one of the questions that people will ask is, how do you get information when you're remote viewing in any respect? And some people see an image, some people hear. In this case, I heard her voice speaking a whole sentence of words, knew exactly, that it was her and what she meant. It was not ambiguous at all. The same way that people will get a tactile feel or a smell or a taste. Any of your senses can, in a sense, be used during the remote viewing session. Again, I know I'm dovetailing multiple things together here, but we only have an hour and I'm trying to pack as much information as I can in here.
That is okay. All right, well, the next question that we've been given before was, what are the protocols for remote viewing or remote influencing? Now, of course, this is going into what we're going to be doing in the course, but if you can, give a little bit of a prelude of what it is that we are going to learn, that would be great.
Yes, I will try to tell you. First, I will deal with remote influencing. So remote influencing is a term that's used. It came out of the remote viewing community. And at the advanced levels of remote viewing, the target could be an individual. In fact, it can be the mind of an individual. This is advanced stuff, but it's not so different. The same way that you would project your consciousness, and that's really what you're doing in remote viewing, is you're projecting your consciousness into a target, a place that's distant in time and or space, and you're bringing back the information. It's coming back to you, being sent back to you. Now, if you did that and your target was a person's mind, and this is in the case of the military remote viewers and the intelligence community remote viewers, they are asked to do things like, we want to know the mental state of this foreign leader. Is he of sound mind and body? Is he crazy? Is he, can you get a sense for what he's thinking and what he's feeling, or she? And they were able to do this and collect enough information that the intelligence community thought it was useful, especially when the target was unknown to the viewers. So there's a way of doing it, as I said, using a kind of an address system, a series of random numbers. So you can assign a target and the viewer doesn't know what the target is. In this case, they would be told it's an individual, but they wouldn't be told who. And if they came back and said, oh, this person is very narcissistic, they're very self-centered, they seem to be quite confused. I got the feeling that they couldn't quite tell this from that, so and so on. And if the target happened to be a world leader who that described almost exactly, then the intelligence officers would, and the analysts would say, yeah, they're probably on target, and that makes sense what they said. Now, once they were able to do that, the next question was, well, if you can sense what they're thinking and feeling, can you influence what they're thinking and feeling? And there were some experiments in remote influencing. In the case of the intelligence community, they were saying, can you make this person, if for example, they're feeling paranoid, can you make them feel more paranoid, or can you make them feel less paranoid? We're trying to negotiate with them. The more paranoid they are, the less likely we're going to be able to succeed in these negotiations. Or perhaps they're feeling depressed or suicidal, and it's it's an enemy world leader. Well, can you make them more suicidal, so maybe they'll try to kill themselves? These things actually did happen. Now, the main group, the main body of experienced remote viewers who were involved with this, pretty much universally had a very negative reaction to this. And they basically said, either at the time or later when they got out of that military and wrote books and so on, that they were not at all comfortable with this. And they thought, one of the quotes was, this is not what remote viewing was ever intended to do. And they felt like it was unethical and probably not even healthy for the remote viewers to be doing, to try to get into somebody else's mind. One thing to get into their mind, another one to try to alter their mind. And so we don't do any teaching or encouraging of that kind of remote influence. So let's cut remote influencing out and come back to the main question, which is, what are the protocols you use to learn to do remote viewing? The main protocols are based on the idea that you should be able to teach anybody to remote view. And it is very much like teaching music. If you had a class with 40 people and you were teaching people to play the piano or the recorder or whatever, some students are going to excel. Some are going to have better dexterity. Some are going to have a better pitch, or some are going to be tone deaf. A few people. I've really never met anybody who couldn't remote view. Everybody can learn to a lesser or greater degree. Pretty much everybody that I've ever had in a class, if they believe that remote viewing is possible, they can learn. That's the one exception. If you have somebody come into a class and they are convinced that remote viewing is not possible, those people generally do not do well. Although I've had some very skeptical people come into my class, and I've convinced them to be open-minded enough to try it. And in the end, some of those become the best remote viewers. So, but they have to believe it's possible. The natural psychic ability is not something that's required. My experience with natural psychics is that they tend to get flashes of information. So they will get a flash if they were just untrained naturally psychic. They would get a flash of a color or a number or a word or an image, and these flashes would come, and then that would be it. The remote viewing protocol was very much designed to try to establish a link between the viewer and the target so that the viewer could collect information, not just in one or two flashes, but could continue to collect information. And one of the things they realized about the protocol is that you need to start very generally. You need to start connecting with the target very slowly. And then what we say is that you open the aperture. Another image might be if you were in a room, or let's say you're in a closet, in a dark closet, and you suddenly open the door, you may for a second before your pupils dilate, get a flash of an image, and then after that you'd be blinded by the light and you wouldn't see anything. So the remote viewing protocol, this is just an analogy, but sort of not a bad one, is designed to open the door to the target very slowly. Open the aperture very slowly so that at first you just get a little bit of information, but instead of being blinded by a flash of information, you open it slowly enough that your eyes can adjust. And this is, so what we do is we start with the most general information. And the first step in the protocol is you have to trust your intuition. And all you're trying to do is sense or feel whether the target is man-made or natural. That's it. That's the first step in the protocol. There's some other protocols that come before that, much harder to explain. But when you start trying to collect information, the first piece of information that you want to collect is it man-made or natural? And then the next step is you choose from a list of 7 categories of targets. And those include, is the target primarily water or land or land-water interface? That's where water meets land, like a beach or something like that, or a river running through the middle of a field. Or is it a structure, like a man-made structure? Or is it a life form? Or is it a mountain? And these we take from this list. And it's part of the training is to sort of memorize this list, although we do have a cheat sheet system that helps people get up to speed. And once so you start off, and first all you want to do is man-made or natural. And let's say I say it's man-made. And then I want to pick from that list I had. And let's say the next image I get is that it's a mountain. And at this point, a lot of people will say, oh, it's a man-made mountain. There's no such thing as a man-made mountain. Clearly, I've missed the target. I'm no good at remote viewing. I give up. And a lot of the protocol is to keep people there and not being self-critical. Because as I would point out to somebody, if the target was the pyramids at Giza, and you described that as a man-made mountain, I'd say that's a pretty good description of a pyramid. And so you can't second guess. What you do is you start with the most general, and then you slowly build out. And then once we get past that list of land, water, interface, mountain, life form, structure, then we start to look for the most general things. And depending on who's teaching you the protocol, I would say that you generally start with color. I think that's the most general one. That's how I learned to remote view. You start by trying to sense the color, the primary colors at the target. And then we go down a list of other things. Start with colors, then textures, then feelings. And then we work our way up to more complex things like smells and tastes. And then eventually you get to starting to sketch any images that you have. And eventually it gets to the point where you're drawing very specific drawings if you have images that you can draw, as well as describing other things that are a little harder to explain, like the emotional things. What emotions are you sensing at the target, or what energetics are you sensing at the target? By energetics, for example, if you felt very strong vibrating, well, if the target was a power plant, then feeling this vibrating feeling might be one of the main attributes of the target, and that would be a excellent target feedback. And if you were doing a power plant and you said that it was loud and you felt that you were shaking and you felt electric, you're probably on target. Because if you were at the Ponte Vecchio in Venice and it's just an old stone bridge, it's not vibrating, it's not electric, and it's not loud. Well, maybe the tourists are, but you get the impression. It could be. So hopefully that explains at least the philosophy and the idea behind the protocol. It was very well thought out, and it was tested over years, starting in the mid-70s at Stanford Research Institute, right through to the late 80s when they were using it operationally for the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and the US military. So.
Great, thank you. The next question, I think I can answer this one myself since I took the course back in March. It says, how long does it take to master skills at a minimum? Well, after you take the course, you will know how to do it. You will know in your own brain how to do it. Being that I took the course, I can guarantee that. And everybody, even the most skeptical person in the class, had some level of remote viewing by the end of the course. And so that, of course, there's other levels to get deeper and deeper into these things. But the biggest thing, of course, is that you want to be able to know that you can do it. And yes, you will be able to do it by the end of the course.
Even the most skeptical person in that class that you were in was a successful remote viewer, and probably more convinced of the science behind remote viewing than people who are not skeptical, because that particular skeptic spent a lot of time asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so out of the interest of time, I just wanted to get into the last couple of things. We've got another question on the chat, but this one isn't for you. This one was for Becca. It says, and I'm guessing this comes out of the being after you said you could get influenced. It says, what are your thoughts or Becca's thoughts of a person using energy medicine or some other type of thing to help keep from being influenced?
Oh, okay.
I did what?
No, we don't need you.
Well,
What are you doing?
I unmuted her so she could answer the question.
Well, yeah, I know, but this is something for another talk, I think. I don't think that it needs to be answered today.
Right, but what I can say
But
is,
I would love to hear what your thoughts are of why, like, how can you prevent yourself from being influenced? Yeah.
but part of the training in remote viewing, although this is primarily part of the training for something called extended remote viewing, which is the level above coordinate remote viewing, sort of the next class. It has to do with techniques to envelop yourself in shield, basically. How to shield yourself from being negatively influenced, and and these techniques would work very effectively. And if anybody takes the class and that's one of their concerns, we can talk about how to do those, how to do those techniques. They're not overly complicated. You just have to have a intention. You have to have a strong intention. And if you understand how to do it and you have a strong intention, it will work.
Yeah, knowing the background of that question and answer. It's kind of one of those questions that you can't really answer until you understand how remote viewing works. And then once you understand how remote viewing works, then that question actually becomes very simple. So did I say that correctly, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so then the last question that we were given online, it says, what are the most useful practices we can do for 10 to 20 minutes to help develop your ability to interpret intuition? I want to add a little caveat to that, being that I guess the question is really asking, what are the benefits of remote viewing besides being able to see random targets? How, like, we know that of course it can help develop your intuition dramatically, but what are really the benefits that you've seen in your life? Maybe Becca could even go into her life. She's also an explorer, remote viewer, and then how can you get that down into 10 to 20 minutes a day? Good luck.
Becca, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's okay. I will, sure. I've used it actually now that I am an energy medicine practitioner. I'd have to say that I'm really sort of understanding our clair sensibilities that I did originally learn from the remote viewing. I've been able to use it with my health. I've been able to use it in trying to figure out what direction I want to go in regards to business, in regards to health, in regards to finances, in regards to pretty well anything that I want to ask a question of the field, as we call it. So yeah, it's made me actually quite a powerful energy medicine practitioner. I wouldn't trust my intuition the way that I do now, and it's because of the science that was behind remote viewing that we learnt initially that really gave me the confidence to go, oh wait, that's a hit. You know, that I'm getting an intuitive hit that actually is a value that can, you know, give me the correct answer. I trust it emphatically actually at this point because of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost trust it more than my own logic. To be honest, after you understand what a hit is, and you go, wait a second, there's way more backing from the matrix or whatever you want to call it than it is from just my logic. So it's a very nice second opinion tool that I use all the time. Yeah. All right, David, your turn.
Yeah. So what you can do in a short period of time. Well, first, if you learn to remote view, to do a session the way that we teach, first of all, depending on how effective you are as a meditator, if you can get into a deep meditative state quickly, some people can do it very quickly, then you can, because that's a lot of the time, teaching people is to cool down, as we say, bringing your beta brainwave state down into alpha, and then later on we go into theta. And if you are practice remote viewing every day, if you practice meditation every day and you got good at that, then you could, that would be a great benefit all around, because just meditation is going to be great for you. But then you would be able to use the techniques specifically more quickly. But as Becca said, once you've used the techniques and you've learned to trust your intuition, it becomes part of your life, and you can use it in all your decision making. And that's really probably the most valuable thing. For example, when remote viewing was taught to law enforcement, the cops asked David Morehouse to come back and teach the next level. And he said, oh, this is great. Can you guys like lie down on the floor and meditate and solve crimes? And they said, we don't have time for that. We're cops. We work like 16 hours a day. But what you taught us was that it's okay to trust our intuition. And intuition is such a big part of law enforcement. Trusting your gut is such a big part. But, you know, these guys are skeptical. They don't come from the, you know, from a background where that would be encouraged in many cases. So once they realized that they could trust their intuition, they could do their jobs better, and they wanted to know more about remote viewing and learn more, just so that they could use real-time intuition to, you know, interviewing suspects or whatever it is. And you can use that, you can apply it to so much in your life. I think that's really the short answer, even though I never really have short answers.
Well, that's great. I thank you so much, David. I think we're out of questions at this point.
Okay.
However, I do want to use these last few minutes just to talk a little bit about the course, possibly.
Yeah.
So the course that we have at Core Potentials here in Vancouver, it's going to be running from the 25th to the 29th, I believe. It's the Wednesday to the Sunday that weekend. It's a Wednesday night, a full day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Believe me, it is as short as we possibly could have made it. We're trying to make it short so that it was available for people to be able to work and, of course, also take the course. Also, we wanted to combine both the learning the theory of remote viewing and the actual practice of remote viewing into one course. So because we were able to do that, you'll be able to come to the course, and by the end of the weekend, you will be able to remote view, which is awesome.
Originally, this curriculum was a 7-day curriculum. It started as a 7-day course. I would like to say that both Dave and myself, we got better at teaching. The more you teach, you get better, and you realize which explanations work and how to get the message across a little faster and what analogies to use so the light bulbs go on and people go, oh, I get it, so we can move on to the next point. And but really, that period of time that we have set aside is the shortest that you can do it. If you want to get through to the point where you have all the basics of remote viewing and have had time to do enough sessions that you've had the results and you've had the aha moment to say, wow, this really does work, and internalize. And it would be a shame for you to like learn the protocol and then just sort of be left hanging.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the old days when it was 7 days, we used to teach the class 3.5 days and then 3.5 days. But the first 3.5 days was so much theory, it wasn't really fun. This way, at least, we get through the theory and we start really remote viewing. And once you do it, it's
Life-changing.
I mean, it is life-changing, and it's fun and exciting, and it's interesting, and it's intellectually challenging and rewarding, and it's emotionally rewarding, and it's a lot of stuff. And I can't recommend it highly enough for anybody in any walk of life. Remote viewing will make your life better.
And so this course was just done in Toronto, and it went, the people who went to that course had to pay $12.50 US to take the course. And because we are Canadian, we want to bring this course to more Canadians. Of course, we are not doing US dollars, we're doing Canadian dollars for the course. And of course, even if the course isn't for something that you would want to do this time, or you want to think about it a little bit more, please let us know, and we'll keep you on the roster for if we ever are able to do this again. And of course, pass it on, tell other people about it happening, because it's just such great information to have, and I would love it to be available to more people.
It really is. And I will say this, having taught all over the world, the Core Potentials environment is an ideal environment. It is, I've taught this in the basement of hotel room, of hotel conference centers, all kinds of weird places, basements of churches, all kinds of, and it's a really nice, beautiful environment where the Core Potentials folks have, and that it's a reason to do it there, rather than in the basement of some hotel in some big nameless city. You get to do it with a view of the Pacific Ocean and everything. It's really nice.
So that's it for us. Unless anyone else has any other questions, is there anything else you would like to say before we sign off here today, David?
No, I mean, I think I've said pretty much all of it. If people are skeptical, please reach out to support at Core Potentials. They can put you in touch with me if you have other specific questions or concerns. You know, people sometimes have very specific concerns about their, you know, health issues or whatever it is. We can deal with almost anything. We just need to know in advance. And it's, I just can't tell you. You know, my family, my wife, my kids have learned to remote view. And I just think it's a skill. I personally think that this should be required in every school around the world, but we're not quite there yet. So at least the people that are sort of savvy can start by learning to remote view, and then we can build the community from there.
Yeah, great, wonderful. All right, awesome. So thank you everybody for watching today, and we will send out this recording to you all. And like I said today, if you email support@corepotentials.ca, not .com, CA for Canadian, then we will make sure to pass that discount on to you. All right. So cheers, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, David.
Yes, thanks, David. Cheers.